On the back of the $1 bill, there's an eye at the top of the pyramid design, representing the all-seeing eye that God uses to watch over humanity. In Western culture, the eye often symbolizes observation and surveillance. The Five Eyes Alliance, formed by the intelligence departments of 5 countries, is a multinational intelligence organization. It has a history of over 70 years, yet it only became widely known to the public in the last 20 years. How was it established, and what events has it been involved in? In this episode of History Investigation, we'll cover it all. The Five Eyes Alliance originated during the Second World War. In July of 1940, Great Britain was struggling in its fight against Nazi Germany. Continental Western Europe had already fallen, and Britain could only turn to the United States for help. The British ambassador to the U.S., Philip Kerr, proposed to President Roosevelt that their 2 countries establish an intelligence exchange. Although Roosevelt agreed, the United States had not yet entered the war at the time, so implementing the proposal didn't go smoothly. It wasn't until December 8, 1941, when Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, that the U.S. officially entered the war and became official allies with Britain. Only then could the intelligence exchange between the 2 nations fully get underway. In May of 1943, the U.S. and the UK signed the UKUSA Agreement, along with a series of subsequent addendums. These agreements stipulated that the 2 countries would share intercepted cryptographic intelligence and establish mutual intelligence liaison offices. The United States was responsible for monitoring Japan, while Great Britain was responsible for monitoring Germany and Italy. At that time, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had not yet fully shed their status as British colonies, but they were also included in the agreement. With the signing of this agreement, the Five Eyes Alliance began to take shape. This agreement gave the US and Britain a huge intelligence advantage in World War II. The 2 countries would share post-war cryptographic intelligence and establish mutual intelligence liaison offices. The United States was responsible for monitoring Japan, while Great Britain was responsible for monitoring Germany and Italy. At that time, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had not yet fully shed their status as British colonies, but they were also included in the agreement. With the signing of this agreement, the Five Eyes Alliance began to take shape. This agreement gave the US and Britain a massive intelligence advantage in World War II. There was extensive intelligence sharing. Both sides got a taste of the benefits of intelligence cooperation. Until the end of World War II, this agreement was never terminated. In the new post-war world order, the US wanted to dominate the world stage. The UK also wanted to maintain its status as a great power. Both sides wanted their eyes and ears all over the world, so a new agreement was born. On March 5, 1946, Churchill delivered his Iron Curtain speech in the United States, which kicked off the Cold War. On that very same day, the UK and the US signed their most important post-World War II intelligence cooperation agreement, the UKUSA Agreement. This agreement was essentially a continuation and refinement of the UKUSA Agreement. The agreement laid out every aspect of UK-US intelligence cooperation. The core content included the scope of intelligence sharing, the liaison agencies for both sides, permissions for sharing intelligence, and so on. This agreement also defined the initial spheres of influence within the Five Eyes Alliance. The UK and the US were the core of the Five Eyes Alliance, and the UK had a high degree of control over Australia and New Zealand. Although Canada was also a member of the Commonwealth, geographically it was too far from the UK and too close to the US. Soon after, it signed a bilateral intelligence agreement with the United States. The UK, Australia, and New Zealand then jointly established another multinational intelligence agency, the Melbourne Defence Signals Bureau. Therefore, in the early days of the Five Eyes Alliance, there were basically 2 sides, the US and Canada on one, and the UK, Australia, and New Zealand on the other. Externally, when facing the Soviet Union, the 5 countries worked together in unison. Internally, however, the UK and the US also tried to strike a balance. In subsequent amendments to the agreement, the status of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand was further solidified, and the Five Eyes Alliance was officially formed. Externally, when facing the Soviet Union, the 5 countries worked together in unison. Internally, however, the UK and the US also tried to strike a balance. In subsequent amendments to the agreement, the status of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand was further solidified, and the Five Eyes Alliance was officially formed. Model. Other Western countries joined through different agreements, later forming the Outer Rings of the 9 Eyes and 14 Eyes Alliances. From the 1950s to the present day, the Five Eyes Alliance has been pulling the strings behind the scenes, orchestrating espionage activities against countries all over the world. They've consistently used wiretapping, assassinations, and overthrowing governments to further their own interests. In 1960, Patrice Lumumba was elected as the first Prime Minister of the Congo. He was the leader of the Congolese national movement and one of the founders of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But Lumumba showed signs of leaning towards the Soviet Union, which made him a thorn in the side of the Americans. To get rid of him, the US supplied the Congolese opposition with weapons and money, backing their armed uprising. With the political situation in the Congo unstable, Lumumba was forced to ask the United Nations for help. The US-controlled United Nations forces were sent into the Congo and arrested Lumumba. Then once the situation stabilized, they intentionally let him go. In the end, the American Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, and Britain's MI6 jointly orchestrated a plan, working with the opposition to have him killed. The Five Eyes Alliance's involvement in overthrowing other governments doesn't stop there. In 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was democratically elected as the Prime Minister of Iran. During his time in office, he pushed for social reforms, but his most notable measure was the nationalization of Iran's oil industry. Oil was Iran's most important economic resource, the lifeblood of the nation. But Iran's oil had been under the control of the British company BP since 1913. Mossadegh's policies infuriated the British. The British government decided to work with the Americans to overthrow him. Through the cooperation of the Five Eyes Alliance, the UK and the US manipulated the Iranian parliament and stirred up the opposition, and also directly sent US special forces to support the opposition. In 1953, the Mossadegh government was overthrown, and Mossadegh himself was kept under house arrest until his death. Something similar happened to Salvador Allende. He was a Marxist who was elected president of Chile in 1970. During his term, he pushed for socialist reforms in Chile, advocating for the nationalization of large industries. He was also on friendly terms with the Castro regime in Cuba, which did not sit well with the United States, who viewed South America as its own backyard. First, the US drove down the price of copper on the international market, which quickly plunged Chile, a country dependent on copper exports, into an economic crisis. Subsequently, the US Central Intelligence Agency and Australia's Secret Intelligence Service jointly plotted a coup in Chile, overthrowing the Allende government. In 1973, Allende was killed at the presidential palace. The Five Eyes Alliance doesn't just topple governments. It also uses espionage to interfere in business competition. In 1994, Saudi Arabia was taking bids for an aircraft order totaling $6 billion. The main bidders were Airbus from France and McDonnell Douglas from the United States. To win the contract, Airbus bribed Saudi officials. While this kind of behavior is certainly shameful, the US National Security Agency actually got directly involved. Using the Five Eyes surveillance system, they intercepted and exposed the calls Airbus made to Saudi Arabia, causing Airbus to lose the bid. And the company that won the bid, naturally, was America's McDonnell Douglas. And in the campaign waged by Western countries against Huawei in recent years, the fingerprints of the Five Eyes Alliance are quite obvious, sparing no effort to smear and suppress the company. In mid-2018, the intelligence chiefs of the 5 countries reached a consensus to contain Huawei, which caused Airbus to lose its bid, and the winning company naturally became America's McDonnell Douglas. And in recent years in the Western countries' campaign against Huawei, the fingerprints of the Five Eyes Alliance are quite obvious, sparing no effort to smear and suppress them. In mid-2018, the intelligence chiefs of the 5 nations reached a consensus to contain Huawei. After that, the intelligence agencies of the 5 countries started to coordinate their messaging, publicly attacking and condemning Huawei, boycotting Huawei, and preventing it from getting into their communications infrastructure, especially when it came to building 5G networks. Then at the end of 2018, the US, working with Canada, engineered the Meng Wanzhou incident, which is still unresolved to this day. And at a meeting in Scotland in April of 2019, the Five Eyes Alliance once again discussed the risks and threats posed by Huawei. I think they themselves know very well that Huawei's communication systems don't have any backdoors. It's just that once countries all start using Huawei's technology, it would be much harder for them to install their own backdoors. The intelligence advantage that the Five Eyes Alliance has built up over many years would be completely wiped out. That's why they've been lobbying everywhere, trying to stop Huawei from rolling out its 5G technology. These days, the Five Eyes Alliance is becoming more and more active in the public eye, especially on issues of global communications and network security. Using counterterrorism and national security as an excuse, they continuously pressure tech companies to add backdoors to more products, giving governments enough access to carry out indiscriminate, around-the-clock information monitoring. They've even tried to pass laws to ban end-to-end encryption. In a joint statement once issued by the Five Eyes Alliance, there's a sentence that goes like this: "Privacy is not absolute. If we are impeded from accessing information, we may implement a variety of measures to achieve lawful access." The UK's intelligence law allows the government to force British companies to decrypt encrypted information. Australia passed a bill at the end of 2018 that allows the government, through backdoor access, to get a hold of communication content from encrypted software and to monitor it. These incidents are just a fraction of what the Five Eyes alliance has been involved in. This line intentionally left blank. This line intentionally left blank. This line intentionally left blank. They gather intelligence on a global scale, meddling in other countries' affairs in an attempt to control the world. During the Cold War, the Five Eyes alliance's #1 enemy was the Soviet Union. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Five Eyes alliance lost its primary target, New Zealand. Canada and Australia also gained full independence. This caused a shift in the alliance's internal balance of power. The development of the Five Eyes alliance stalled for a while, until September 11, 2001. A terrorist attack completely rewrote the global landscape, and the Five Eyes alliance found a new mission, and that was to carry out a massive global war on terror. This also strengthened the relationships between the Five Eyes member nations. This continued until 2009, when the Five Eyes alliance believed that through the war on terror, they had defeated terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. They then turned their attention back to China and Russia, viewing them as new threats. The Five Eyes alliance's favorite way to get intelligence is through covert surveillance. But even the most secret plans can be exposed one day. In 2013, Edward Snowden exposed the U.S. PRISM program, along with other top-secret surveillance programs, including the Upstream Collection Program. The former collected user data through tech companies like Google, Apple, and Microsoft, while the latter collected data directly from communications infrastructure, like fiber optic cables. Both of these programs that Snowden leaked fed into another intelligence network system called Echelon. And the one controlling that system was the Five Eyes alliance. People suddenly realized that, under the watch of these Five Eyes, they might have never had any privacy at all. Today, the Five Eyes alliance is gradually stepping out from the shadows. When these Five Eyes came out of the shadows and into the light, what they revealed was an even greater ambition. Now, I'm not against all intelligence agencies. Almost every country in the world has them, and their importance to national security is obvious, because of the special nature of their work. Some intelligence agencies might have to do some dirty work behind the scenes, and that's not entirely incomprehensible. But the problem with the Five Eyes alliance is that, even by the standards of intelligence agencies, what they've done is very hard to accept. They instigate coups, overthrow the governments of other countries, conduct mass surveillance on citizens, and help their own corporations gain an unfair advantage. All these actions done under the guise of national security are really all about maintaining their own hegemony. And that's what this video is mainly about.